It was a historic vote at the United Nations General Assembly. Yesterday, for the very first time, the American representative aligned herself with the Russian counterpart in voting against a resolution in which UN member states condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Despite US opposition, the adopted text is sheer proof of just how isolated the US is in its push to be conciliatory towards Russia in brokering a deal to end the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, let's turn to Iuliia Osmolovska, Director of GLOBSEC Kyiv, who joins us tonight. Good evening, madam. Thank you for joining.
Good evening.
So, a defeat, imagery defeat, PR defeat, there's no other way to put it. How important, according to you, is this blow for the US image as the leader of the free world so far? And what does it say about the US being a long-term partner and ally of Ukraine?
I think the most important, what kind of lessons the Americans will draw for themselves out of this voting and this result. The most illustrative probably out of this is that the original text of the American suggested draft was then later amended by France and supported by a number of European capitals, which actually finally succeeded in including the reference to the full-scale invasion of Russian Federation into Ukraine, then calling for the territorial integrity of Ukraine and ending with lasting comprehensive peace based on the UN Charter. So basically, I think that these amendments are very remarkable when it comes to the clear distinction between the US position and the European position when it comes to the current view of the full-scale invasion of Russian Federation into Ukraine. When it comes to the diplomatic moves in the General Assembly. So it's definitely, we can see a couple of tricks in there because the Americans then successfully passed the original text through the United Nations Security Council, resolutions of which are having this legal binding nature, whereas the General Assembly resolution doesn't. So in this case, we see this kind of dancing around diplomacy. But the most important, yes, I begin with what I started. So what kind of lessons the Americans themselves will draw out of this voting and what's going on in the United Nations?
And what if this strategy by the United States proved effective? After all, we learned that a rare earth deal is just about to be signed. Volodymyr Zelensky is close to signing the deal with the United States, with Donald Trump's administration. So what more can you tell about that?
Well, the information that we receive has been quite contradictory and conflicting. But for me, as a former diplomat, the very beginning was quite harsh when Americans submitted the draft and they expected Ukrainians to sign it unconditionally. So even not discussing the content, which normally is the procedure in negotiations when you discuss the draft text. So right now, Ukrainian side obviously rejected the first proposal, and then the parties engaged into consultations. And right now, as far as we understand, they're coming to sort of compromised vision of that. For Ukrainians, definitely this agreement is the way to establish long-lasting or long-term partnership with Americans, with their support. And the rationale behind it was that having more of American presence in business and economy in Ukraine's industry would definitely be indirect kind of guarantee that the foreign aggressors and Russia, namely, won't be attacking the country once again. The tricky point about this agreement is actually that Russians are trying to trade the potential of cooperation with the Americans on the Ukrainians' rare earth materials, which currently possessed on the temporary occupied territories. And Russians are offering these kind of opportunities for Americans, so which actually raises the question of legality of this move, because the territory has never been recognized as a territory that belongs to Russia. So basically, this is the challenge that we see at the moment. But as far as we know, in this draft agreement, there are the provisions that the agreement also covers the rare earth materials which Ukraine has in possession in temporary occupied territories that could be available once these territories are deoccupied.
But having said that, it's a good sign that Donald Trump is going to sign this deal with Volodymyr Zelensky and not with Vladimir Putin. That would tell that the United States are recognizing this territory as belonging to Ukraine, right?
Yeah, it's definitely the matter of interpretations. But if we can link with the previous question, the explanations of Americans why they opted for this softer language of the resolution is because they currently aspiring to have this role of mediator, and they don't want to alienate both sides. This is why they used this softer language in the resolution. But on the other hand, actually, I'm questioning, yes, probably they're making Russian side more favorable into getting into communications with Americans. But the recent statement of American officials towards Ukrainian officials actually raises the brows whether this doesn't alienate Ukraine from Americans, and America acting in goodwill as non-biased broker.
So how exactly will this be proceeded? So the United States will invest their money in taking the resources from Ukraine, and who exactly is going to be overseeing this process? European troops, you think?
It's a bit different story because the agreement obviously is about the time when the ceasefire is reached and the sort of peace settlement is negotiated and accepted by both sides. And I have to remind you that it's eventually not the President Zelensky who will be signing the agreement, but actually the Ukrainian parliament who has to ratify it at the end. Both agreements actually on rare earth materials and also this peace settlement. So this will be probably the most tricky point. And then only then the time will come for the European troops as potential participants of this peacekeeping. And then the question comes, what these troops are designed for, what they will be actually doing, because there is still polemic about whether they're being seen as a deterrence force, as a peacekeeping force, as a peace implementing force, and where they will be stationed, in which quantity, and how the process of rotation will be organized, and what form of support from America they will receive, because they definitely need this support. And the statements that we received from the recent meeting of President Trump and President of France, Macron, that Trump is actually not excluding that there will be backing of some kind from the United States. But what this some kind means actually still remain unclear.
So just as a note to say, the Ukrainian parliament extended the martial law today, reaffirming the position of Volodymyr Zelensky as a legally elected president. All right, so on the other hand, Russian army, which is ramping up its capabilities, this is a very big concern for the Europeans. Do you see, and can you imagine a situation where the United States actively and effectively counteracts right now these efforts by the Russians?
In Ukraine, we definitely don't have any illusions that Russians have no intentions to stop the war, and they will be using this peace settlement and ceasefire as the pause for them to ramp up and to be ready to attack again. So nobody is actually optimistic about that. So definitely it remains to be seen still how this dialogue between the United States and Russia will continue, because there is also another explanation of this swift rapprochement, if I may use this phrase, of United States with Russia, is actually not because they support the Russian position, but because they would like to lose the alliance which is being formed right now between China and Russia. So I think that it's still very early stage. However, it's already been a lot said that makes our expectations quite pessimistic. But on the other hand, this is a very good opportunity for Europeans to get united and actually to act in a single voice, for which actually I see a lot of positive signs. And definitely Ukraine should be viewed as part of this, as an asset for European security, not as liability or the cause for insecurity.
Iuliia Osmolovska, Director at GLOBSEC Kyiv, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
And that concludes this edition of World Talks and World News Tonight. Thank you very much for watching, and good night.